Okay, obviously I wasn't expecting to speak today. But then again, I was expecting to speak next week, and we're going to be in Montreal next week, so it'll be great because Mel will speak next week now. So that worked out kind of good for us. And since nobody wants to really come back to our place, except for Evelyn. Thank you very much, Evelyn. We'll do that in 2 weeks' time. Not in 2 weeks. 3 weeks' time. We'll do that in 3 weeks' time. How's that? 3 weeks' time. 3 weeks' time, everybody can be invited back to our place. I'm going to talk today. Last time I spoke on what? Commandments. Which commandments? The last ones. The last ones. Which, to give a summary of the last ones, they are. The last five. But quick summary of them. One sentence, one statement. Love your neighbor as yourself. Relationships. Okay, so continuing on that theme, relationships. What happens if you isolate yourself from others? Have no relationships. Well, what happens is you are 2 to 3 times more likely to die an early death. And that's independent whether or not you take care of yourself by exercising and refraining from smoking. They still say you're likely to have an early death. If you isolate yourself from others, you are more likely to contract terminal cancer. As well, if you are divorced, separated, or a widow, you have a 5 to 10 times greater chance of being hospitalized for a mental disorder than if you are married. Notice single doesn't fit in there. They're still happy. Divorced, separated, or widow, usually not necessarily used to being by yourself, and then you get back cocooned again. Because one of the greatest things about being married is the opportunity to have somebody to talk to you every night and stuff. You have somebody to share life with. And that's kind of a nice bonus. If you are a pregnant woman with good personal relationships, your chance of having some kind of complication without good personal relationships, chance of having complication are 3 times as great as those with strong relationships, given the same amount of stress. There's different medical things that are taken out over time. People can be isolated even in a crowd. When I was young, I probably didn't notice it so much, but as you get older, you can notice when people walk into a crowd and they don't want to actually ever talk to anybody. They're completely separated. Now, some of that is just differences in natural personalities. So occasionally people think that if somebody else's personality is not the same as them, that they're negative and they are mean about that, which has really got nothing to do with this. But the idea is it's good to have good outward relationships, talking with people and being social and not being walled off. And when people have some negative things happen to them, they oftentimes get walled off. So if you've seen somebody who's been really treated bad and they never want to seem to open up to anybody, you ever notice that? How many want to admit that that's been you at various times in your life? Somebody really ticked you off and you end up having that wall because you're thinking the next person might do the exact same thing, and that's not a healthy place to be at. But, we're not all the same. Some of us lean, in my case, I actually lean more to being a task-oriented person as opposed to a people person. And a people person, sometimes they're more known for talking to everybody, but they don't necessarily get all their tasks done right away because the tasks aren't necessarily as important as the people. Whereas a task-oriented person who can be so focused on the task at time, they walk by people and people wonder if they're really ticked off at them or whatever, but it had nothing to do with the people because they were focused on the task. They're different personalities, and it's nice to have a little bit of each to be focused. But there are different personalities, and you shouldn't be beating up somebody because they have a different personality. It's great that we have these different personalities because they really help us all work out better. Everybody know what type of personality they are? Because somebody will lean more towards one or the other, and we can usually pick out each other pretty quick along the way. The Bible has much to say on relationships, so it's hard generally to give great advice in just one sermon. So I'll probably talk about it in a number of different ones. However, you can define the problem really quickly. The greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. So the problem with relationships is that that hasn't happened somewhere along the way. Both perspectives, one perspective, hasn't happened. Yet there's also some tremendous difficulty sometimes in misunderstanding and in deception that people have that can contribute to that. There are no perfect people in this world. Sorry to tell you that. People who have always had perfectly happy relationships, who've always been perfectly humble. Of course, when they tell you that, they're not humble anyways. Or happy and never sad, but there are people who strive to do good, who work hard to lift others. And those are generally considered good people. But people have had difficulties. Unfortunately, the people who really strive to work hard to lift others are sometimes outnumbered. When you consider relationships, the first question you should always ask, are you taking care of your load, sharing your portion of labor and worry and care? What are you doing? It should be more of a personal reflection. So most of this one here will be about what are you doing, and then I'll go through some other ones with difficulties at another time. In Proverbs 17, today it's all old school, no PowerPoint. No time to get the PowerPoint together. In Proverbs 17 and verse 17, it says, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. A man lacking a judgment strikes hands in pledge and puts up security for his neighbor. He who loves a quarrel loves sin. He who builds a high gate invites destruction. A man of perverse heart does not prosper, and he whose tongue is deceitful falls into trouble. To have a fool for a son brings grief. There is no joy for the father of a fool. But a cheerful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones. So, some different characteristics in there that are really important. But it comes down to a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. So when times come tough, they should be there to take care of it. Take care of it with you. Be there with you. A true friend is one who stays with you even in adversity. Some people that we have in life will add to life. Adds to your life. And you'll enjoy them. You have other people who subtract from life. They're always just taking something from you. And you'll probably tolerate them. You'll probably tolerate them. Getting is easy, giving is harder. People who subtract, they don't often advance, but they usually are the type of people that know their rights well. That's the type of personality. They know their rights well, this is what I should get, this is what I should get, and they're the type of people that are giving. The people that are adding to other people, they often advance in whatever they set their hand to, because when something is needed, they're always ready to give more. Just the personality that they are. And then you have some people who multiply. They give with forethought and love to help others become givers themselves. They want the other people to become successful enough that they're going to take care of other people and pass it on. And then you have some people who, using the same type of mathematical term, divisive. Their negative actions are usually intentional, and they hurt people who make themselves look better by trying to make someone else do worse than they do. So one of the best examples of that is negative political advertisement. They're looking to destroy the other person to make themselves look better. That's a divider. That's a negative attribute. As a result, people like that in our personal lives, they usually create havoc in people's lives, and you realize it, and before long, you end up avoiding those people, because you never know when they're going to turn and hurt you. And that's generally what takes place. You avoid them. The people who multiply and give with forethought, those are the people you end up respecting. So when you look back at the great teacher, he wanted to teach you in order for you to succeed again later on down the line. Those are the people that you end up respecting. Some of the ways that people came up. Jesus gave us an example of being multipliers. he would add things to anybody he met along the way in a positive way. But he was always about trying to make disciples who could go make disciples themselves. He wanted that process to feed out from there. And if we look at Hebrews 5, in verse 8 it says, although he was a son, he learned obedience from what he suffered. And once made perfect, he became a source of eternal salvation for all who would obey him. It was designated by God to be high priest in the order of Melchizedek. But he became obedient through suffering. He didn't become bitter, he became better. That's kind of an example for us. You know, he became, and it's talking about him, it says, he learned obedience from what he suffered. You know, oftentimes you're thinking about Jesus being perfect and stuff like that, not needing to learn stuff along the way, but here's a description for him, that he learned obedience from the things that he suffered. And that's an example for us that we got to learn from that, not to become embittered by it, which is spoken out against a number of different times, but to learn from it to become better. And ultimately, he used the sufferings that he became to be a wonderful blessing to us. In Ecclesiastes 4, I believe it talks about friendship. Ecclesiastes chapter 4. And in verse 9, 2 are better than 1, because they have a good return for their work. If one falls down, his friend can help him up. But pity the man who falls and has no one to help him up. Also, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves, and a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. And it's actually kind of fascinating. If you put the 3 strands together, a strand might be able to hold up so much weight. But if you wove the 3 strands together, the fact that they're all resting upon one another actually allows that rope to hold more weight than just 3 times the one strand. They become stronger as they work together. But also, if you have 3 people and somebody attacks, then you can see from 3 different angles and be able to protect each other's backs at the same time. And a lot of different ways that's better. So it's good to have a friend. It's good to be able to help each other and be able to do more. Everyone wants great friends. Are you one of those? Aristotle said, not too often I quote the Greeks, but he said, in poverty and other misfortunes of life, true friends are a sure refuge. I mean, no matter what happens, they're going to be there for you. A great way that most of us can recognize that. The young, they keep out of mischief. To the old, they are a comfort and aid in their weakness. And those in the prime of life, they incite them to do noble deeds. That's a great way to describe a friendship. They incite them to achieve more, to do more. You can trust them to be there for you. A good friend is someone who sees you at your worst, but never forgets your best. So it's like your husband. He might see you at your worst, but he always thinks of you at your best. Right, Dave? Yeah, see, it's someone who thinks you are a little bit more wonderful than you really are. That's a nice. A good friend is someone you can talk to for hours or be with in complete silence. And here's a really odd one. A good friend is someone who's as happy for your success as you are. They're not envy, they're not jealous, they're just as happy for you that you succeeded. A friend should bear his friend's infirmities, not make them greater than they are. And that's when sometimes you look at some of what Job's friends were saying. It's almost like they were beating him up when he's already down. And a good friend, when you're down, you want them to be able to help pull you up, pull you back up. In 1 Thessalonians 5. And in verse 14 it says, And we urge you, brothers, warn those who are idle, encourage the timid, help the weak, be patient with everyone, and make sure that nobody pays back wrong for wrong, but always try to be kind to each other and to everyone else. So be very productive, but also in all things try to lift other people up. Try to be there to lift other people up. In Galatians 6, Galatians talking about things that were destroying the church there and being worried what other people were thinking about them. Instead, in Galatians 6 it says, brothers, if someone is caught in a sin, you who are spiritual should restore him gently. But watch yourself, or you also may be tempted. Carry each other burdens, and this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. So, if somebody's doing wrong, then not about picking on them, not about knocking them down. It's like trying to help them up, but make sure that you don't get dragged into it too. Make sure you don't get dragged into it too. And when you start to help other people, you know what? Then you're fulfilling the law of Christ. And the idea is love of God, love of your neighbor. You're fulfilling it. If anyone thinks he is something when he is nothing, he deceives himself. Each one should test his own actions, then he can take pride in himself without comparing himself to somebody else. For each one should carry his own load. So it says first, make sure you're always there to carry your brother's load, and then it tells you to carry your own load. So, it's partly about, well, not everybody else owes you. We get in this concept of this idea of entitlement that everybody else owes me, and it says make sure that you're taking care of yourself. Don't be looking to try to have everybody else take care of you. But as you're able, take care of somebody else that needs it. Take care of somebody else who needs it. Anyone who receives instruction of the word must share all good things with his instructor. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. The one who sows to please his sinful nature, from that nature will reap destruction. The one who sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to those who belong to the family of believers. So this concept is, the attitude is always striving to be a blessing. Not for any other reason than it's just that's what it's expected of you. So as you're able, do it. And that should be the attitude and heart, and quite often is the heart that so many people have, and that's the one thing I've always been amazed at when people are experiencing life-threatening illness. How many people that have been really good people, when they want to talk with somebody near the end of their life, and they'll often say, I don't feel like I really did anything to be a blessing to other people. And I've been fascinated by the people who have said this to me at times when they've gone to their last month or so in life, because the people that quite often have said that to me are people that I would have thought spent their whole life taking care of people. But yet they never thought nothing of it because they just automatically did it, and they didn't think it was anything special to actually be doing it. But they always were taking care of people. And I thought, well, that's kind of cool, because that shows, again, the humility that they didn't think that they earned anything from doing it. They just thought that they ought to be doing it. And that should be the characteristic of people who are disciples of Jesus Christ, who's willing to give his life to help everybody out, to always be there to try to help out as you can. You can always add to everyone you meet by being concerned for them, listening to them, or getting to know what they need. The idea of putting other people's first. In Proverbs 19, and in verse 4 it says, wealth brings many friends, but a poor man's friends desert him. And unfortunately, that's very true. If somebody has something, then everybody else sometimes wants to get whatever they can get from the person. And when they don't have something, then all of a sudden some of their friends disappear because they're going somewhere where they can get something. A false witness will not go unpunished, and he who pours out lies will not go free. Many curry favor with a ruler, and everyone is the friend of a man who gives gifts. But a poor man is shunned by all his relatives, and much more do his friends avoid him. Though he pursues them with pleading, they are nowhere to be found. That's kind of a sad acknowledgement as you go through Proverbs there about the way that people actually do interact quite often. And I've seen so many people who try to curry favor with rulers and are happy to be around people who give out gifts, period. I've often thought, though, if that person just wants to be around you because you have something to give, they're probably not much of a person that is going to be there when you have a difficulty, right? And that's generally what it's saying there, is that most people will just take off because they're only looking into it for themselves. Whereas the good person is the person who's going to be there during adversity, the tough times. They're going to be there all the time, not there just for something that they can get back out of it. All things being equal, though, people will work with people they like. So I say this is kind of a good thing about giving a first impression when you go for an interview. Just kind of after my daughter. All things being equal, people will work with people they like. Now, all things not being equal, people will still work with people they like. And you can see where people who have not been as good, but they picked somebody because they thought the other person was annoying to work with. If they get a choice, people are going to pick people that they like. Now, what are some of the characteristics when people don't like somebody? What do you think comes out? They are a braggart. They're always complaining. They're really lazy. They never pull their own weight. Those are the comments that come out. You know, they could have all the skills in the world, but if they have any of those last characteristics, who really wants to work with them? You don't. People want to work with people that they like, that are easy to get along with. In Proverbs 22, and in verse 11 it says, "He who loves a pure heart and whose speech is gracious will have the king for his friend." So, you know, if you're just trying to do what's right, and you're always trying to be nice, and you're a great influence on others, and that's what you are then, the king will be your friend. That's kind of a nice thing, isn't it? Because that's assuming the good king has enough wisdom to know that this is somebody that would be good to have around, somebody who has a pure heart. Because most people who would be the good kings would be able to tell when somebody was blowing smoke. I don't know if that's a phrase that everybody understands, but friends are forgiving and they're not easily offended. So when you look at Proverbs 27 and in verse 17 it says, "As iron sharpens iron, so one man sharpens another. And friends should be there to help make each other stronger." So a good friend should be able to tell you something when you've done something stupid. And you're there to encourage one another and strengthen one another. Now, the more you do, the more influence you generally have. The more untrue friends you probably will have, and the more people who will question your motives. And RG3, anybody know who that is? Quarterback for the Washington Redskins. Or he was a quarterback. He didn't get to play it all this year because they wanted to save the salary down future years. But that's a tough thing. But he left his locker this week, and he left one of the things hanging in his locker. And he got slammed in some of the liberal media because they thought there was some kind of arrogant thing that he was trying to leave behind, blah, blah, blah. Did you see that in the news?
I don't know what was said, but I know what was said.
He got slammed. It was negative press. What was in his locker was the paradoxical commandments. And obviously the person who wrote the article that slammed him had no idea that these were a standard thing that so many people have hung up in various places, so that when something negative happens, you're not overcome by the negativity, you still do the right thing. So when you do the right thing, some people will complain and argue against you. Do the right thing anyway. And that's what all these phrases are about doing the right thing anyways. But because he's a Christian, and he had this thing up in his locker, they slammed him. And that's where it didn't matter if you're the white Tebow quarterback or the black RG3, the reason why they're both getting slammed is because they're Christian. And the sports media is way worse than the mainstream media for slamming Christian beliefs. But he got slammed for that. So, you know, the more successful you are, lots of times, the more untrue friends you have, the more people who question your motives. But there's much that can be accomplished the more that you do. The more that others think, the more that you accomplish, the more others, the more risk that you take. Oh, let me read this again. Blah, 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 blah. There's much that can be accomplished if we care more than others think is wise, if we risk more than others think is safe, if we dream more than others think is practical, expect more than others think is possible, work more than others think is necessary, and when we conduct ourselves according to our highest standards, we are less likely to be defensive, easily offended, and take the road when attacked by others. I say that because when you know you've done all you can do, you can let criticism roll off your back like rain. You got better things to do than come down to that level. When you know that you've done all you can do, then you should be able to just go forward. In Leviticus 19, and in verse 16, do not go about spreading slander among your people. Do not do anything that endangers your neighbor's life. I am the Lord. Do not hate your brother in your heart. Rebuke your neighbor frankly, so you will not share in his guilt. Do not seek revenge or bear a grudge against one of your people, but love your neighbor as yourself. I am the Lord. And I had read that last week. So you hear all this different stuff. Listen and seek to be a blessing, but don't pass on gossip to someone's hurt. Don't be a garbage dump for gossip, but be a blessing. That's really what gossip oftentimes is. It's just a garbage dump. It's just spreading negative things. If others have done you wrong, they can still be a blessing for you. They can be a painful lesson. When you've been wronged without cause, you have a perfect opportunity to also learn about yourself. You can turn and go down Get Even Alley, but it's a dead end. Sorry, not a very good analogy maybe. You can try to stay on Kindness Street as long as possible, and then turn onto Forgiveness Lane and heading away from Get Even Alley. You climb to the nearest high hill until you look for the high road. No? Take it and stay on it with both hands clinging for dear life, and if you lose your way in a dark valley, ask God to help, and you know that He'll always be there for you. Because He'll always be there for you. The high road is not even the easiest road at first, but it's the only one that leads to the life that God intended for us. And when we look at Matthew chapter 5, Matthew 5, where it says, turn your other cheek, and then we'll go down to maybe verse 43. You have heard that it was said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be sons of your Father in heaven. He causes the sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. If you love those who love you, what reward will you get? Are not even the tax collectors doing that? And if you greet only your brothers, what are you doing other than more than others? Do not even pagans do that? Be perfect, therefore, as your heavenly Father is perfect. So it says, seek to be a blessing. Period. Now, does that mean that God, when he talks to this expression, it says God sends rain and it works for either people? Does it mean that God says that you have to help people no matter what? That's a good question. Does it say that God says you have to help people no matter what? What do you think? No matter what, you got to help somebody. Doesn't matter if they're a friend or an enemy, you got to help them out no matter what. Sound good? If somebody's looking to do something wrong, are you going to help them do it? So not no matter what. There are times that will be the case, okay? But I like to think of this in a way that, the expression I said the other day is I said that obviously I'm not in favor of homosexuality. If you've never figured that out from me, well, I'm not. I'm also not in favor of Islam religion. I'm also not in favor of progressive socialism, which I consider a religion. I'm not in favor of any of them. But I think when I go out to help somebody, I don't really care what their viewpoint is on that. When I go to do something that's a reflection of me, it's not a reflection of them. But I am not going to help them do any of that. If you get the difference? Okay, so if we're out and the neighbor needs driveway shoveled and I disagree with them totally, it doesn't have nothing to do with the shoveling of the driveway, right? But if the neighbor wants me to go in the gay pride parade with them, I ain't going. Okay, that's a totally different component. God wants us to take the high road to great relationships, be somebody who cares for others, even an enemy. And he knows we may stumble. But he wants us to remember that Jesus called us his friends. And that he's there to pick us up. And that he's done so much to encourage us to do good. God has instructed us to forgive others and for us to remember always that we need forgiveness ourselves. Many of us, as we've gotten older in life, we've learned to protect ourselves with walls. When people have hurt us, we put up a wall up so that they can't hurt us anymore. Walls let arrows out, but they don't let arrows in. And God doesn't really want us to be firing the arrows. Hurting people, though, often hurt people. And not because they mean to or want to sometimes, but sometimes just out of pain themselves and out of fear. And if that's the case, somebody is really hurting for something and they tend to be a little bit more grumbling, then you should be a lot more patient because you know what's actually caused it in the background in order to help them through it. Because it's a natural response in all of us. Hurting people oftentimes hurt people. In so doing, it helps them to break down the walls when people can be positive. We need to all learn to break down those walls in ourselves and in others, and to build healthy relationships as best we can, as it is up to each and every one of us to do, as we are able. You should be the type of individual who is seeking to always add value to others and to multiply some. And why I say that is that if you have a financial planner, if you're a financial planner, if I'm going to take what I have as an asset and I'm going to invest it, if I invest everything in one thing and it goes belly up, not going to be a good idea. But then again, if I take what I have and I invest it in a million different things, am I going to be able to pay attention to any of it so that any of it, I'm seeing if any of it succeeds? And the answer is no. So, just using that analogy, the concept is that you should be trying to multiply. Now, the natural place that you should be trying to multiply originally is your family. It's commanded of parents and grandparents to teach their children. So what? So that they can be the people they ought to be with you there or not. And to multiply that character that God would have you be to your children. That's the closest place. The people that you have the most influence on are the people closest to you. And then to be able to pick some people outside of that you can take your time as much as possible to help them to grow. You can't multiply everyone. You can always add to everyone you meet by listening to them, by being concerned about them, getting to know what they need, think others first. But in order to multiply, you must invest in others. You must take time to think and to carefully plan and to invest. You can't spread yourself too thin. If you want to help others, you also have to pick people whose need for growth matches your gifts and talents. I always find that part fascinating. You really want to teach somebody. If they don't want to learn, how successful are you going to be at teaching them? So I'd really like to coach and pass on some skills, and the player doesn't ever want to run or do anything. How successful am I going to be? Zip. Very, very little success, right? Has to be somebody who's motivated, but it also has to be, if I'm going to try to teach somebody how to do music, and they hate music and they love sports, maybe the right person is not trying to work with that person. You've got to pass on the things that you can excel at and have ability in, and to somebody else that can do that as well. It's sometimes hard to help somebody who needs it, but doesn't know it yet. Ever have that expression? Somebody who needs help, but they don't know it yet. Have you ever been in that position? Have you ever reflected on what somebody's done after the fact? Sometimes it's kind of cool getting older and experiencing some of the things, is how somebody tried to address something after the fact that you maybe didn't even recognize it at the time. And later on you think about it, oh, they really did try to help out. It's kind of cool how they did that and the way that they approached it. And they were always thinking about ways to help you succeed. And sometimes the best ways to do that is not to beat people over the head, but just to give them little things along the way to help them succeed. Don't ever forget that God trusted you with your talents to be a blessing to others. Now, you know the concept of giving out the talents. I'm not going to go through that passage, but he gave out the talents. Didn't matter if the person had 10 talents, didn't matter if the person had 1 talent. What did God want? Whatever you were entrusted with, make it a blessing. Make it a blessing. And God trusted you with your talents to be a blessing to others. He loves you. He believes in you. And he always said, never give up. Never give in. Just go forth.